friends and members of the Furman community, faculty and staff, former students from over 6 decades, neighbors, family, friends. It is my honor on behalf of Furman to say welcome and thank you for being here, especially on the cusp of another weather event, maybe. We gather today for a profound reason. Dr. Frances Willard Pate left her mark on all of us. She did so not with noise or spectacle, but with the steady, demanding grace of someone who believed words are never just words, and that paying attention is a moral act. In classrooms and conversations, she taught generations of students how to read closely and how to live honestly. She mentored colleagues and students alike to listen for what is true, brave, and fully human beneath the surface of things. Understandably, then, ours is a gathering of mixed emotions, and we need not tidy them up. Faith and love are often learned in the dark, where grief and gratitude always keep each other company. So let this be a spacious place this afternoon, a place for laughter that catches us by surprise, for tears that need no apology, for silence that speaks its own eloquence. If you come today full of stories, tell them. If you come carrying sorrow, lay it down gently among friends. If you come unsure of how you feel, know that you're not alone, and we walk with you. Dr. Pate taught many of us that story and language matter because people matter, and today we honor her best by speaking honestly, listening carefully, and then loving each other well. Now, before we say anything more, I invite us to practice together one of the most meaningful forms of speech she knew so well, silence. In a moment of quiet, let us remember and hold gratitude for her life and work by offering space for our grief and love to speak in ways that words cannot. So I invite you to join me in a moment of silence, in remembrance and in celebration. Thank you. May this time together be both a celebration and a benediction of our gratitude for a life that shaped us individually and as a community. Welcome all of you to this shared work of love.
Good afternoon. My name is Eleanor Ball, and I am here speaking on behalf of my family, my parents, Mary and Turner Ball, my sisters, Caroline and Connor, our children, Isaac, Jacob, Maddie, Anna, Parker, and Max, and our husbands, Steve and Mark, and of course for Willard. My parents first met Willard in 1958 at Emory University. She was my mom's big sister at A.E. Pi. And although Willard graduated in 1959, they remained close friends. And over the ensuing years, after the early death of her parents, we became Willard's family and she ours. The particular relationship we claimed was cousin. The first documentation of this might have been in a letter, which we found among the many things in Willard's house, from my mom to Willard in 1974. While she was leading her England program. It began, "Dear Cousin Willard." The letter referenced an upcoming family trip to Baton Rouge to visit Mom's family for Christmas. I wasn't born yet, but Willard and her cat were joining my parents, my sisters, our 2 dogs, and a litter of new puppies to drive across the country. I came along a couple years later, and my parents asked Willard to be my godmother. At the christening, the priest asked the godparents if they were willing to renounce the devil. Willard declined. Many of our memories of Willard revolve around food. She loved great food and was a great cook who insisted on the best ingredients and top-of-the-line cookware. It hit us particularly hard this past Christmas, realizing just how many of our Christmas traditions depended on Willard. For our Christmas Eve party, Willard cooked the fresh ham and the meatballs and the mushrooms and the homemade garlic mayo. And I think we went through a dozen eggs and a bottle of olive oil trying to recreate the mayo, and it did not work. The same was true for our Christmas Day food, for which Willard often went to great lengths to procure. For many years, she brought the traditional smoked salmon and Christmas pudding back in her suitcase from England. She spent much of her summer putting up shelled butter beans, often driving to her hometown of Hawkinsville to get the best ones for Christmas dinner. And she ordered the cow, which she called it, from the New York butcher shop for our Christmas dinner. Beyond Christmas, she cooked the black-eyed peas and turnip greens for New Year's Day, the Easter ham, and she and Caroline collaborated on the tomato goat cheese tarts for birthday week. And a special treat were always the pies from Buttermilk Sky. Aside from our 52 or so Christmases we shared with Willard since 1972, most of our time together was in Sapphire in the mountains of western North Carolina. In the early years, she had a room upstairs in our 1894 farmhouse, still referred to as Willard's room. About 15 years ago, she built her own home on the property. She loved walking and often walked several miles each morning before most of us had gotten up. She also loved more adventurous hikes. She and my mom often took us on what we affectionately called death marches, heading out with only a vague description of where we were going, two overly confident leaders with a sketchy trail guide and little sense of direction. On one particularly memorable hike, we spent several hours looking for a forked tree, at which we were supposed to take a left and find a beautiful waterfall. We never found that forked tree or that waterfall. When she wasn't reading, grading papers, walking, or cooking, Willard could be found in her garden in Sapphire. Her favorite crops were asparagus, beans, potatoes, leeks, and of course garlic. She kept us supplied with fertilizer and gardening equipment. Digging potatoes each fall was her favorite activity for our kids, and Willard always planned the digging around their visits. If you ever spent much time with Willard, or been to her home, or just met her, you know she had a love and fascination for cats. Cat towers, shredded upholstery, hundreds of cat figurines, books, calendars, photographs, drawings, and paintings, tables and lamps, cups, glasses, bowls, plates, aprons, dish towels, and pot holders, sheets, pillowcases, bedspreads, and of course, her signature t-shirts, sweatshirts, and jackets. I also learned a lot about great Southern literature from the names of Willard's cats. Asbury, Clytemnestra, Lucas, Faulkner, Flannery, and Yock. Any guesses? Yaknabotafna, yeah. For short. Apparently not a very nice cat, but with a name like that. In addition to her own cats, Willard also made sure her friends shared her feline joy. My parents always had cats, but Willard gave me my very own cat for my 5th birthday, a beautiful Seal Point Siamese who I affectionately named CW after cousin Willard. When my sister Connor got married, Willard gifted her and her new husband Steve with 2 Siamese kittens. Willard barely tolerated the family dogs, but occasionally would note one was okay for a dog. Willard also spent a lot of time photographing cats. She took a beautiful photograph of CW and Sapphire when I was a little girl. For years, she promised to give me a copy, which I finally received when I got married. Of course, Willard made a special provision in her will for her last two cats, Faulkner and Flannery, making sure they would go to someone they already knew and loved, Larice Stevenson, who took care of them when Willard was away. They've now settled into Larice and her husband Mike's home and sleep with her granddaughter Scarlett, who seems to be following in Willard in all her love for all things cat. Willard photographed more than just cats. She was rarely without her camera in the mountains. She set up a tripod with a long wired remote and would sit for hours in a folding yard chair, waiting for the hummingbirds and buntings to land on the feeder. More recently, she captured photos of the deer and the bears. As you'll hear more about later and see, she became an accomplished photographer, publishing a book featuring mostly photos of her favorite subjects, animals. Over the years with Willard, our experiences and relationships grew and intertwined. Our friends became her friends, and hers ours. Many of her friends we came to know were her students and colleagues at Furman. Visitors to the mountains included Margaret Marks, Sally Fitzgerald and the Mudfords from England, Karen Johnson, who used to push me in my stroller when I was little. Joni and her family have attended crawfish boils. Mark and Linda Kay, regulars in Willard's new house. Nick and Luciano have also spent several Christmas Eves with us in Atlanta. My sister Caroline, who went to Rhodes, joined Willard's UK program one fall, although she never forgave Willard for giving her a C. Willard always wanted one of us to be a Furman student, and last year, Caroline's daughter, Anna Cook, fulfilled her own and Willard's wishes. Willard was Anna's friend and mentor here, and Anna will miss the comfort of having Willard nearby, as well as the frequent rides to the mountains. Cousin Willard was generous and loyal, and touched and enriched our lives in so many ways over the years. Our last time together was the annual weekend to select our Christmas tree, which Willard never missed. This year, when she and Anna left to return to Greenville Sunday afternoon, Willard spoke the words she always used to say goodbye. I'll see you when I see you. Her spirit will live on in the traditions and the places we've created. And Cousin Willard, we will see you when we see you.
Thank you, Eleanor. I'm Mark Canavera. I'm a 99 Furman alum. Willard was my advisor from 1995 to 99, and my friend ever since. Just remember, there's no such thing as an entirely right or an entirely wrong decision. Willard spoke those words to me on her porch the night after my graduation from Furman in 1999. I'd gone to her house to pick up my graduation present, a book of photographs of Oxford, Mississippi. A few days later, I would leave to teach English in Burkina Faso in West Africa. During that porch conversation, I expressed gratitude to Willard for encouraging my choice to join the Peace Corps, support that was invaluable since my own parents, despite having served in the Peace Corps themselves, were less than excited about my decision to move to one of the world's hottest and poorest countries. Willard's tacit approval of my decision gave me the chutzpah to take the leap, and I told her so. Well, moving to Africa was clearly the thing you were most excited about doing after graduation, Mark, she replied. But just remember, there is no such thing as an entirely right or an entirely wrong decision. Many of Willard's exceptional qualities are woven into that advice. First, there's the powerful truth of the words themselves. The next time you are facing a consequential decision, weigh the pros and cons, reflect in your own way, and then make the decision. There's some kind of liberation in acknowledging that your decision cannot possibly be either completely right or completely wrong. Life is complex, and the best we can do is endeavor to make the best possible choices moment by moment. Although Willard would never have used this word, there was a kind of grace in her approach, an empathetic concession that most humans are trying to make sensible choices as they navigate life. The scene also conveyed one of Willard's core philosophies about teaching. To learn and to evolve, people must make their own decisions. Many years ago, she and I discussed the movie The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, which she had recommended I watch for the performance of Maggie Smith, one of her favorite actors. Willard said something like, "What the movie shows us so brilliantly is that teaching can be dangerous unless the teacher can get their ego out of the way." There is a profound sense of humility in that statement. Getting her ego out of the way was something that Willard trained herself to do over 60 years of teaching. She recognized that spaces of learning were best used not for teachers to demonstrate their wisdom, but rather for students to learn how to think. Although Willard was in no way maternal, she nurtured students' thinking. Thinking, truly, critically, deeply thinking, is not easy, and society is giving us ever-increasing opportunities to avoid it. A consummate teacher, Willard fundamentally believed in her students' abilities to think. She knew that while she could create the parameters in which students could learn, students would have to do it for themselves. She could bring students to the cave, show them the lamp, give them some tools, but students would have to light the flames themselves. Her genius as an educator stemmed from her belief that students could do it, from her insistence and encouragement, however gruff, and from her refusal to pander. Teaching was Willard's vocation in a way that few people are called to a single vocation in life. Furman is a better university for her decades of commitment to the craft of teaching, and she was the embodiment of the Furman advantage, a term she really disliked for its commercialism and for its lack of poetry. But Willard represented the best in teaching and mentorship that Furman or any university has to offer. Willard and I remained friends after I graduated. In fact, I tended to think of us as friends even when I was a student. My mother recently asked me how Willard and I became friends, and I realized that there never really was a beginning. We were just friends from our first meeting. It's odd to consider, given that I was 17 years old and Willard was 56. But why not? We enjoyed each other's company, we debated politics and prose, and we shared a love of literature, film, and theater, and cats. Often the same books, movies, and plays. Underlying our love for various forms of the arts, I think, was an understanding that they can help society to evolve. Literature is not required to be useful. Beauty is enough, but it can help to open our minds, and maybe eventually our hearts, to others' ways of thinking. Film doesn't have to serve a social function, but it can, and most of the best films do. Even for avowed agnostics like Willard and myself, there may be something like a moral calculation embedded in our appreciation of the arts. Willard would have hated my use of the word moral there. When she was asked many years ago to give a lecture about her values at Furman, she accepted the invitation, then proceeded to tell the audience that her values were Faulkner, London, and cats. She may have been mocking the exercise, but I don't think so. She valued Faulkner not only because he was America's most inventive wordsmith, but also because he was helping us to imagine a South and an America beyond racism, mired in it though he was. She loved London as a second home that allowed her perspective on where she came from. She often quoted Samuel Johnson, "When a man is tired of London, he is tired of life." But teaching in England also offered her an appreciation of her own home, As I traveled the world, she told me once, I eventually came to realize that my own home was just as good as anywhere. And as for cats, it goes without saying that we should all value cats. I have adopted Willard's practice, and my current two are named Zora and Milkman, after the protagonist of Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon. I will miss Willard immensely. The week she passed, we had planned to travel to Mississippi with another of her former students, Linda K. Myers. The trip was something of an annual tradition for us, a pilgrimage. I'm reading the wrong copy of my speech. Let's find the real one. The trip was something of a regular tradition for us, a pilgrimage related to Faulkner, yes, but also to eat at the world's best catfish restaurants and to ponder the wonders and the conundrums of the Mississippi Delta. We postponed the trip for a few reasons, and Willard's final gift to me is that postponement, which allows for a reflection on memento mori, what becomes of a postponed trip that is never taken. When we had traveled to Mississippi on past trips, our anchor space had been Square Books, an independent bookstore on Oxford's Town Square, widely considered one of the nation's best local bookstores. We returned to the bookstore multiple times on each trip to browse, and over the course of a few days, Willard would accumulate a pile of books that the bookstore staff would keep behind the counter for her. And on the last day of the trip, she would close out her tab, and the bookstore would ship the scores of books that she had purchased back to Greenville. Who keeps a running tab at a bookstore? Willard. A few days before she passed, I received my last text message from her, a manifestation of love, of her love of learning and literature. She wrote, I wish for Square Books. Thank you.
I'm Jean Prevost, Willard's colleague from the English department. As many of you know, and as our previous speakers have attested, Willard was fascinated by animals and by the way their presence inspires art and reflection. It was an interest that we both shared, and I have lots of memories of talking with her about animals. Once, during an English department creative writing workshop, a visiting writer invited us all to do a short activity where we described a familiar space and imagined one person we knew well in that space. When we'd all finished, Willard volunteered to read her piece, which was about eating breakfast in her kitchen with Faulkner. It was only when she described Faulkner jumping onto the table and trying to drink the milk in her cereal bowl that I realized she was talking not about the famous Southern novelist, but about her cat, whose name was Faulkner. On another occasion, I recall asking her how her day was going, and she told me, I've been watching the geese today. I'm fascinated by the geese. I'm photographing them. It was classic Willard to be captivated by the strange beauty and difference of the geese, those noisy campus visitors that it's so easy for us all to take for granted. It seems fitting then that I ask us to reflect on a short passage from the great American poet Walt Whitman, whose words we will see inspired Willard's brilliant photographs of animals. And this reading is actually in your program. This is from Song of Myself. I think I could turn and live with the animals. They are so placid and self-contained. I stand and look at them long and long. They do not sweat and whine about their condition. They do not lie awake in the dark and weep for their sins. They do not make me sick discussing their duty to God. Not one is dissatisfied. Not one is demented with the mania of owning things. Not one kneels to another, nor to his kind that lived thousands of years ago. Not one is respectable or unhappy over the whole earth. So they show their relations to me, and I accept them. They bring me tokens of myself. They evince them plainly in their possession.
When I began teaching at Furman 26 years ago, I heard three things about Willard Pate: that her office was a campus landmark, that she was fairly low-tech, and that she was an extremely accomplished photographer. Shooting almost exclusively in black and white for over 40 years, Willard photographed the mundane. Her early photographic style falls into the genre of street photography, wherein observation and anticipation are key. Done well, this type of photography reads like poetry. Lines, forms, subjects come together like a puzzle in a decisive moment. In Cartier-Bresson style, Willard plucked ordinary facts from their context and re-released them with hidden poetic force. Seeing the street as theater, she captured the small dramas of ordinary life, be it a chicken with a front row seat on a chopping block, a horse with an imaginary saddle, or a cat on guard duty over a brood of rogue guinea pigs. Willard described herself as an observer and introvert. Quote, "The camera has always offered me a kind of protection, a third eye through which to see, but not requiring my immediate involvement," unquote. Her Leica allowed her to travel light and work quickly, as her photographic style was reliant on intuition, impulse, and chance. Of course, this type of picture making also required a certain degree of independence and curiosity, which Willard held in abundance. Willard studied photography with Craig Stevens at the Maine Photo Workshop and with Ernesto Bazan, an internationally recognized street photographer with whom she traveled extensively since 2001. Together, Willard and Ernesto made repeated trips to Cuba, Argentina, Peru, and Brazil, 26 photo workshops in all. It was through Bazan Photo Publishing that Willard's 2015 book, With Animals, was published. In this book, Willard explored the inseparable bond between animals and humans. Her pictures read as intimate portraits of animals as playmates, food source, companions, and co-workers. Her images document a reciprocal love, a communion between people and animals that Willard acknowledged was a nod to her childhood in rural Georgia. Willard's professional activity for the last 30 years was predominantly exhibiting her black and white photographs. She grumbled to me occasionally that her research, making and exhibiting images rather than writing and publishing articles, wasn't taken seriously by some colleagues. She didn't dwell on this, for Willard understood what every serious photographer understands, that making images is not so different than writing, that a sequenced group of photos can speak volumes about a place, and that observation and note-taking can be done equally well in camera. Willard's photos have been exhibited in the US and abroad, including at the Texas Photographic Society, the National Center for Fine Art Photography in Colorado, the Cleveland Museum of Art, the Spoleto Festival in Charleston, and her home away from home, the APG Gallery in Atlanta, where she was a longtime member. Willard was a finalist for the Julia Margaret Cameron Awards in 2014, and she has worked in private and permanent collections, including the Museum of Contemporary Art in Georgia. In 2017, I accompanied Willard to the Aran Islands with a group of Furman students as part of the British Isles Study Away. Inishmore, one of the 3 Aran Islands that lie in Galway Bay off the coast of Western Ireland, was a place that she began taking students in the 1980s, and a place that she returned to repeatedly for the next 40 years. While the faces of her travel companions changed, one thing did not. She always traveled with her camera. Drawn to the Aran Islands through the literature of J.M. Singh and James Joyce, Willard's photographs documented the sea, the rocks, the cliff-top remains of pagan forts, the miles of gray stone walls, and ancient Christian structures. It was a tough and beautiful landscape filled with generous people that seemed to provide Willard with limitless inspiration. Her bond to the islands was apparent to anyone lucky enough to travel there with her. And yet, for all the frames that she exposed over the years, she was also aware of what a camera couldn't do, or what a writer couldn't capture about this place. Quote, "When on a solitary walk across the upper lane on Inishmore, I am somewhat like a transcendentalist, standing in a stillness, punctuated only by the sound of the wind blowing in from the sea on one side of the island to the sea on the other side. If there is such a thing as oneness with nature, I experience it there." Unquote. As a teacher, Willard was patient up to a point. I think the phrase "doesn't suffer fools gladly" might apply to Willard. Her comments could be blunt, especially for students who didn't get it, as she would say, meaning not trying to connect to something bigger than themselves, be it art, literature, or film. In one instance, she relayed to me that a student wrote, quote, "horribly, covering all that is conceivable to be able to cover all without feeling or appreciation." Awful was a word that she sometimes used to describe student photographs. But when she found students with promise or those that wanted to learn, and there were many of them, she was their tireless supporter. She truly wanted her students to become better writers, better photographers, better informed individuals. At the time of her passing, we were about 8 months into the sequencing of her Aran Island images into book form. Every 3 to 4 weeks, she would show up outside my classroom with a stack of 4x5 prints ready to shape about 40 years of picture making into a concise book. This was quite a task. Negatives, contact sheets, Xeroxed prints, digital prints, new prints introduced each time we met. Unfortunately, this task remains incomplete. But I think often about a photograph that we had earmarked as the final image of her book. It was a picture of an older black and white cat walking away from Willard's camera down an empty Inishmore street. Her subject seems unbothered by Willard's presence, perhaps it sensed a cat lover. And Willard, I suspect, recognized her doppelganger and squeezed off a shot, creating a self-portrait of sort, a punctuation mark to a life well lived. She will be missed.
Friends, I'd like to talk today about our friend Willard. I remember the first conversation we ever had. I was interviewing to teach here. This was in 2008. We sat upstairs at Sobeys and talked about churches in Sicily, Cumberland Island's herd of wild horses, and Oconee bells, a rare wildflower endemic to these mountains that I'd never seen in bloom and figured I never would. "Oconee bells," Willard said. "I have those in the front yard up in the mountains." "Wait, no way. I'll take you to see them." When dinner ended that night, I thought I sure enjoyed talking with her. The idea of the Oconee bell was like a mirage, a dream, never going to happen. But, unbelievably, it did. The next spring, she drove me up to the mountains to see them in bloom, a simple flower with toothed petals, not showy, not common, miraculous and rare. I was lucky to have 17 years of conversations with Willard, but of course, I want more. We talked about everything under the sun: movies, mortgage rates, food, gumbo, crab cakes, the Cookie Monster I bake in a skillet. For turnips, we had a routine. She loved the greens, but saved the roots for me. For breakfast, she liked pimento cheese and Coke Zero. Many times, we'd eat lunch together in the English department. I'd bring leftovers, which Willard would make fun of. "What in God's name is that?" "It looks like dog food." Every year on her birthday, I would bring in a slab of cake and, don't tell, a little split of champagne to share. She did not want a fuss made, yet I always made one. If you really want to know who someone is as a teacher, eavesdrop on a one-on-one conference with a student. I heard this many times. She pulled no punches, knew that writing is messy work, but spent as long as they needed. She was Willard to me, but Dr. Pate to the kids. They're good kids. They can't all write, but they're good kids. And then when they revised hard and the work improved, she'd say so. That paper isn't bad. She understood Furman students and turned her considerable gift for hospitality toward them. Our annual pizza party, hot tea, box after box of cookies from the bakery on Augusta. She knew them because she spent time with them. When we cleaned out her office, we found stacks of papers with her notes in the margins. In those written conversations, I saw Willard push their thinking further. And I saw the postcards and letters they mailed back to her years later from all over the world. At homecoming, she held court. You know this. Just a few months ago, she read me an email she'd received from a student she'd had in 1978. He'd gone to Faulkner sites and regularly reread the novels because of her. As much as she loved teaching here, because of that, when she thought Furman was veering off course, she did not hesitate to march up to admin and say so, in person, with no advance warning. Some policies she felt were utterly stupid, idiotic, a total waste of time. In discussing them, she would give an audible eye roll. It's very bad. To me, she demonstrated the larger possibilities of life when you don't waste time on empty pleasantries. But more often, she told me a story that made me laugh. We had a shared sense of humor influenced by Flannery O'Connor, i.e., let's go through Georgia fast so we won't have to look at it much. Just kidding. I'm just kidding, y'all. I'm just kidding. One time, Willard heard water running somewhere in her house but couldn't figure out the source. So she just let the water run and left on a 2-week trip to Ireland. Another time, she couldn't be bothered to take the ornaments off her Christmas tree, so she just shoved it in a closet and shut the door. She laughed so hard telling me this story that tears came to her eyes. She made me laugh all the time. She was an introvert. She drew energy from solitude and reading, but she had so many friends. We can see this. She knew everyone. She hated anything sentimental or sappy, with the exception of The Incredible Journey, which she admitted made her cry in the movie theater. You know, 2 dogs and a cat making their way home. She was an enviable physical and intellectual shape. Every day she did her 10,000 steps, if not more. Walking Furman Hall, walking in the wind on Inisheer, walking the streets of London or Havana or Quito. Grounded in the South, but she was a citizen of the world. I remember hiking through rhododendron thickets with her in North Carolina and struggling to keep up. Or the Grand Canyon. I'd never met anyone crazy enough to actually hike down to the bottom. She had, so I did too. By being so completely herself, she dared you to be more yourself too. Ernest Hemingway wrote, "Nobody ever lives their life all the way up except for bullfighters." And Willard. She was fully herself at my Thanksgiving table 3 days before she died. Funny, frank, declaring my pecan pie too rich. She brought excellent French wine. "Willard, that's good wine." Willard, "It ought to be." Generous, confident. She stayed until she was ready to go. We didn't say goodbye. We said, as we usually did, "Have a good one. Do the same." She didn't like to be photographed. but I leafed through a folder of photos taken before I knew her. I see her walking into Furman Hall on a day in spring, cherry blossoms, happy to be going to work. I watch her grow younger. She talks with a girl in cat eyeglasses in the cafeteria. Willard, Dr. Pate, is holding back, I can tell, aware of the camera. But in this black and white contact sheet of shots taken while she taught, I know she's lecturing on firm ground. Probably Faulkner. The expressions on her face are ones I recognize. I look up, pay attention, this is important. A fierce cut of her eyes. I can't believe you actually said that. I go back further. March 1968, an article from the Greenville News about a team Willard coached for the College Bowl TV series. She's still writing her dissertation. She's not Dr. Pate yet. See if this sounds familiar. Miss Pate's desk in her office at Furman bears testimony to the tremendous amount of study involved in preparing for the College Bowl encounters. It is still piled high with books, papers, questions and answers from former programs, and other materials which were used by the team and which will be cataloged and filed when time permits. Pixie haircut, big smile, eyes leveled at the camera. She's ready for anything. A break was to include time with her favorite sport, sitting on the banks of Big Creek in Georgia, fishing with her dad. One last photo. 9th grade, Hawkinsville High. She's president of the freshman class, of course. A girl in saddle shoes carrying a stack of books. Just 11 years later, she'd start teaching here. That stack of books. Books brought us together. Books put us to trails in the mountains. Where pink lady slippers grow. On the front step of her house. Guys, you feel it too. It's okay. The garlic she planted sends up new growth. The dahlia tubers she gave me wait underground for summer. We worked together with sentences and words, which are tools for thinking and for a break. We sat in our lunch corner eating chocolate from my secret stash. Everything reminds me of her. Even, stay with me, this interview with the Grateful Dead's Bob Weir on his friend Jerry Garcia. A decade after Garcia's death, Weir reflected, for me, it's kind of like he never left. I can hear him. I can feel him. You know, if I'm headed in some direction he likes, I can feel that. If I'm being headstrong and going someplace where he doesn't like, I can feel that. I don't think this is what they call abnormal psychology. I think when somebody lives in your head and in your heart for a long time, you carry them around when their body is gone. Sometimes I wonder, does what we do matter? Can one person change the world? Yes. Willard did. We're here today to attest to that. By doing faithful work in the same place, with creativity and a sense of humor her whole life, we too can do good work wherever we are. Tucked into a book in her office, I found a brief poem by Walt Whitman, typed on a typewriter with a blurry E. She'd had it a long time. Miracles. Why, who makes much of a miracle? As to me, I know of nothing else but miracles. Whether I walk the streets of Manhattan, or dart my sight over the roofs of houses toward the sky, or wade with naked feet along the beach just in the edge of the water, or stand under trees in the woods, or talk by day with anyone I love, or sit at table at dinner with the rest, or look at strangers opposite me riding in the car, or watch honeybees busy around the hive of a summer forenoon, or animals feeding in the fields, or the wonderfulness of the sundown, or of stars shining so quiet and bright, or the exquisite, delicate, thin curve of the new moon in spring. These with the rest, one and all, are to me miracles, the whole referring, yet each distinct and in its place. To me, every hour of the light and dark is a miracle. Every cubic inch of space is a miracle. Every square yard of the surface of the earth is spread with the same. Every foot of the interior swarms with the same. To me, the sea is a continual miracle. The fishes that swim, the rocks, the motion of the waves, the ships with men in them. What stranger miracles are there? Stand under trees in the woods. Talk by day with anyone I love. Animals feeding in the fields. What stranger miracles are there? A little white flower blooming through the snow. People pushed into braver versions of themselves. Friendship that endures beyond the veil. She lives in our heads and in our hearts. All of these are miracles. She was allergic to sentiment, but I'm not. She'd come into work with the collar of her polo shirt awry, all whopper-jawed. Hold still, I'd say, and she'd let me fix it. It's wrong, she'd say, and I don't even notice. And I'd say, that's why you have me. And she'd say, that's why I have you.
I'm Nick Riedel, I think everyone knows, so there's nothing else to be said. But I want to start with a funny story. I want to start with a funny story about Willard, or a funny story that's only partly about Willard. Our friend and colleague, Vincent Hausman, was acutely aware that, as he put it, there were many queens in the English department, in which he included, I think, ourselves. But he was sure of one thing: Willard Pate was Queen Bee, who must be consulted if anything were to get done. It was a role she played by virtue of her seniority, to be sure, but also her insight and wisdom. I start with this little remembrance of two fallen colleagues as a way of thinking about Willard and her impact and legacy in the English department at Furman, and I will suggest at the institution as a whole. Two of our communication studies students interviewed me yesterday and asked what exactly was her legacy in the English department. And frankly, I thought it was really too immense to sum up adequately in the time and place, and that remains true today. But I start with one remarkable achievement that I think has been an inspiration to us all. The slightest of her achievements, but still immense. She somehow persuaded several generations of Furman students to read the works of William Faulkner. Not reluctantly, but as a rite of passage. Her course in Faulkner was no mean feat. I took the course myself, and it included 4 of the most difficult novels in the American canon: As I Lay Dying, The Sound and the Fury, Light in August, and Absalom, Absalom, in addition to 4 other less complex works. What her students got from her was a sure sense of how the events of the late 19th century continued to shape their Southern sensibilities and the sensibilities of the country as a whole. I'm sure many of you sitting in this beautiful space tonight can testify to the truth of what I say. Her legacy didn't just include Faulkner, but a range of Southern writers. Rather than enumerate these, however, I want to say something about her sensibility as a teacher of this literature. She was always focused on the literary work, to be sure, but she was most interested in using those works to help students think deeply and complexly about the other arts that surrounded the literature: film, theater, music, dance. This sense that individual literary works provided a key to larger aesthetic concerns and thus larger cultural connections was one of the things that made her work in the British Isles so valuable. At its best, that program combined knowledge of literature, economics, politics, and history. And in that sense, Willard anticipated the interdisciplinary work that would begin to blossom at Furman in the 1970s and 80s, well ahead of other schools. To this day, I think the English department continues to foreground the study of literary texts with social, historical, and aesthetic context within social, historical, and aesthetic contexts in ways that can seem slightly old-fashioned, of another time, but that continues to draw students when the humanities suffer all around us. Willard lost many battles on the theoretical and technological front, but her focus on literature and artistic expression remains pretty strong among us as a whole. Willard's other great legacy is more subtle and difficult to see, but she was, as Lynn Shackelford has said about her, one of the most strongly independent-minded people she had ever met. Willard was always her own person and did what she thought was right. She was a young, attractive woman when the English departments and most of Furman's faculty were men. But she fashioned a place for herself and, from my perspective, beginning when I arrived in the mid-'80s, a place for people who were not going to fit into the so-called Furman family. She was a strong advocate for women, both on the faculty and in the extracurricular activities she sponsored. If it is true that the English department was an early leader in fostering difference in our Furman colleagues and our courses of study, and I think that is true, Willard was part of and supportive of that effort, and she was a model for it as a strong-minded, independent, highly intelligent woman who was probably not given the full respect in the institution she deserved. Certainly, she made it easier for me to be myself as an out gay man in the mid-'80s and early '90s at Furman. She always thought I was too aggressive in my ideas, but she allowed and enabled me nevertheless. There is so much more to say about Willard, about how she impacted my life and her students' life at Furman, but to quote Hamlet, I will let it be. Her work as a teacher speaks for itself, and her devotion to her students is legendary. But more to the point, most to the point, she was loved by all of us, and we are lessened by her loss. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Lynn Shackelford, fortunate colleague of Willard's for 40 years and devoted member, along with Janie Tavis and Willard, of the English department's lunch bunch, relaxed gatherings at which, through the years, the three of us reflected on a dazzling array of topics, from the awe-inspiring merits of Moby Dick and Absalom, to the best way to cook college. I believe that almost every person here knows that Willard thought William Faulkner was categorically the world's greatest author. However, she also revered Flannery O'Connor, who was from Milledgeville, Georgia, not far from where Willard grew up, and where she enjoyed taking generations of students to visit literary sites. One of Willard's favorite passages was the climax of the appropriately titled short story, Revelation. O'Connor describes the epiphany of the main character, a self-righteous, middle-aged rural woman, prideful of her Southern respectability and social standing. A revelation that exposes the falsity of her belief that she is more virtuous than others. Willard admired O'Connor's democratic leanings and her lack of sentimentality. So, from Revelation. Until the sun slipped finally behind the tree line, Mrs. Turpin remained there with her gaze bent to them as if she were absorbing some abysmal, life-giving knowledge. At last, she lifted her head. There was only a purple streak in the sky through a field of crimson and leading, like an extension of the highway, into the descending dusk. She raised her hands from the side of the pen in a gesture hieratic and profound. A visionary light settled in her eyes. She saw the streak of a vast swinging bridge extending upward from the earth through a field of living fire. Upon it, a vast horde of souls were rumbling toward heaven. There were whole companies of poor white farmers, clean for the first time in their lives, and bands of black folks in white robes, and battalions of freaks and lunatics shouting and clapping and leaping like frogs. And bringing up the end of the procession was a tribe of people whom she recognized at once as those who, like herself and Claude, had always had a little of everything and the God-given wit to use it right. She leaned forward to observe them closer. They were marching behind the others with great dignity, accountable as they had always been for good order and common sense and respectable behavior. They alone were on key. Yet, she could see by their shocked and altered faces that even their virtues were being burned away. She lowered her hands and gripped the rail of the hog pen, her eyes small but fixed unblinkingly on what lay ahead. In a moment, the vision faded, but she remained where she was, immobile.
Before we conclude, and as a reminder, you are invited to a reception downstairs in the garden room for refreshments and conversation. Now, as we prepare to leave this place, we do so changed, if only slightly, by having remembered together. We go now carrying different things. Some of us carry stories newly remembered. Others carry gratitude long overdue. And others still carry the weight of grief that doesn't move on command. There's no single right way to leave a memorial like this. There is, however, a faithful way. Faithful not to any one creed, but to our shared humanity. And that is to let what we have loved continue to matter and shape us. Apparently, the task of life is not to avoid loss, but to love anyway. And if that's true, then today has been an act of courage. If life and time and teachers like Dr. Pate have taught us anything, it is that meaning often reveals itself not in certainty, but in intention, in paying close attention to what has been given and to what remains. So as you go, may you read more closely, listen more generously, observe more creatively, and speak with the kind of honesty that enlarges rather than diminishes the world. May you tell her stories often, laugh when they invite laughter, and allow grief to soften rather than harden your heart. Go in peace, not as an ending, but as a continuation. What she taught, what she loved, and what she awakened in others does not end here. It goes with you. Thank you for being here.